handout. But I wanted to do a little slideshow first to let you know how I got into all this thing about Benedictinism. And I thought you might like to meet some of my monk friends. So that's what I'm going to do, all right? So this is Blue Cloud Abbey. And when I was being a chaplain and professor at a school in North Dakota, Presbyterian school, it had about a quarter of the students were Catholic, and a Benedictine sister was assigned to minister to them. And wearing those two hats of chaplain and professor, I got burned out by mid-year. So I said to her, "Where can I go for R&R?" And she said, "Well, there's a Benedictine monastery about 3.5 hours from here. And in Dakota, that means you go straight for about 2 hours, turn left, and go another hour and a half." And so I said, "Great, I'll go." And so I'd never been to a Roman Catholic monastery. We had a monk of some sort at our Easter dinner one time when we were in Kentucky, but never had been to a monastery. So I came up, and this was Blue Cloud. Now, I didn't get there in that environment. I got there in that environment. It's North Dakota, South Dakota. But that's Blue Cloud Abbey, and these were, Benedictine monks. So I came up there, and come on in. We're just doing some slideshow stuff first. And there's another shot from afar away, and it's out in the middle of nowhere in the country. By the way, it's on a rise. And there aren't really mountains or anything like that in the Dakotas. In fact, there was a big sign that on the highway that said, "North Dakota's mountain removal project is now complete." So, just to say, this is on a slight hill because Benedictines tried to plant themselves on mountains or hills. In fact, the first monastery of that Benedict wrote the rule, and it's in a mountain. So that was it. Inside Blue Cloud Abbey, beautiful. So this is the choir where the monks sit, and they invited me. And by the way, after I got involved with this, we had January terms at our school. Oh, yeah, I got to do that too. We had January terms at our school, and I did called the Habits of Monks term, and I took 6 students who wanted to take the course to the monastery to live there for 10 days and pretend that they were novices, and the monks treated us really well. And we sat in the choir. There are pews on the other side of the altar because on Sundays this would be a church for the local people in the small town. And then beautiful stained glass windows. That's half of it. It's got the story of the biblical story all along this window here. The other half is here, and Christ is at the center of this whole thing. It's just beautiful along there. I don't know who did it, but that's just gorgeous. And then here are the monks gathered for Mass during the day. And you'll see some of the monks in white are priests, and the monks in black are brothers. In the monastic tradition, you didn't have to be ordained. And so in the Benedictine tradition, the brothers wear black, and the priests would also wear black during the day, but when they're celebrating, they would put on a white owl instead. And they invited all of us. This is an amazing thing. If you know Catholic and Protestant traditions with the Eucharist, you're in a Catholic church. Protestants aren't supposed to be taking Eucharist. These monks said to all 6 students were Protestant, and they said to them, "You're invited to join us for Mass and to partake," which was an amazing thing. In fact, after we had been there 7 days, and they had, I'll just tell you really quickly, when they had it on Tuesdays was, I think, or one day of the week, I think it was Tuesdays, for dinner, they celebrated their community by having a buffet, and that was really a time when they celebrated community together, big time during the week. Just before that, they would have had Mass. Well, after we'd been there 7 days, they were going to have this Tuesday thing going. And the abbot called in all of the students, bless you, and they called in all the students and said, "Would any of you like to do the homily for Mass?" And that would be unheard of. And 2 of my students, one female, by the way, said yes, and so they each did about 6 minutes. And then the abbot said, "These students who have been here during this week already have caused us to question whether we keep the vows that we have made." And so we thank them for being here for that purpose. And I thought, what if a visitors to our churches said that to us? We want to make sure that you Christians who are saying that you're Christians are really, doing what you say. So it was an amazing thing. So this was gorgeous when we had Mass and gathered around the table. And then you would get in two lines, and even I would get in line, and the priest right in front of me would take the cup, drink it, and hand it to me. I would drink it, and I would give it to the person behind me. So they were so open in this regard. Some of my monk friends, that's Brother Gene, who was a Marine. He became a monk later in life. He was married, and then his wife died. And he told me that being a Marine and a monk is pretty much the same thing, only the motivation is different. And one morning in a daily office, morning prayer, they would chant the Psalms in a monotone. And it was the imprecatory psalm that says, "Dash their children's heads on the rocks." And so I'm sitting there saying, "Dash their children's heads on the rocks." And afterwards he said, "Did it bother you to do that, to say that?" And I said, "Yes, it did, Brother Gene." And he said, "Me too." And he said, "I think of all the people in the world who feel that way today. And I pray for them." So that rescued the imprecatory psalms for me. That's Brother Gene. And then Brother Rene, when students first pulled up to the monastery, spent 10 days, this is the guy they met. He was the guy that was, the doorkeeper. And he looks like such a typical monk. It was so good, So there he is. That's the monk. So you're supposed to obey the abbot, but the abbot's supposed to take into consideration your own feelings about everything. We're going to talk about that briefly. That's called obedience, but it's mutual obedience. And he assigned him to play the organ in the office, the chanting. He didn't know how to play. So he told him that. He said, "Well, you can do it." So in about 6 weeks, he learned to play chords. So he was a great guy. And then Father Guy Gao, he was one of the first monks I really got to know. He was the guest master. So every monastery has a guest master and takes care of the guests. And Father Guy was very incredible, very hospitable. And then Abbot Dennis, great guy, and he also was very encouraging, and he's the abbot that told my students, "You're welcome to participate here in the Mass and deliver a homily." And then Father Ray. Father Ray came to our campus, Jamestown College in North Dakota, at my invitation, and he's going to talk some students into becoming monks, hopefully. And our kids were so excited, we're going to see a monk. And I think they were like 6 and 8, maybe. And I was so excited, going to see a monk. And so they had to go to bed before he got to our house. He was going to stay at our house overnight. And when he got up in the morning, when the kids got up, they were at the breakfast table. When he got up, he had on a shirt that said Super Monk. They thought they were going to see a monk in his alb and everything, And so, no, it's Super Monk. So he was great. Father Ray died pretty young. Actually, it was long after this picture was taken, but a great guy. And then lastly, in the slide, of the guys to meet is, sorry this is not clear, but that's Brother Bennett, and he's the most significant monk, one of two in my life. Brother Bennett was, they called the oblate director. And an oblate is a person, well the word means gift, but it's a person who wants to associate with a particular Benedictine abbey and try to practice the rule in his or her daily life. And so I'm an oblate, and there's a lot of us oblates in Orange County. We have a great group that meets once in a while. And he was the oblate director for this abbey. And he's written several books, one I'll introduce you to later. But that's Brother Bennett. So, by the way, there's time for questions and answers at the end here. I'm just going to race through this sheet that you've got in a minute. But yeah, I owe so much to him, and he's just great. And then if you want to see the whole group that was there when I was there, these are all the monks. You can see that most of them are pretty old. And what happened was they built the monastery themselves. What you saw, they built it. And they lived in a type chicken coop, but it was not built, and then they built this thing. They came out to be missionaries in the Dakotas. And they weren't getting new guys in, and they couldn't sustain it. They just couldn't sustain the monastery. So they had to sell the monastery. It's now owned by, I understand, a Roman Catholic, two couples for private retreat monastery in North Dakota. So yeah, so those are my guys, and those are the ones. And now I'm an oblate at Val Guillermo, which is next to Wrightwood and St. Andrew's Abbey. And we'll talk about that some more. All right, sound good? Ready to go? All right. So look at your list here, and I use this so that I can take you away, take you on a way here. Benedict, you can see his birth date there, 480, and he belonged to an undivided Christianity. So you know that Christianity has split up into three major traditions, right? Split up into the Roman Catholic Church, the Protestant Church, and the Eastern Orthodox Church. And there are even divisions amongst that, especially among us Protestants. We just can't get along together. But anyway, but this was before all of that happened. All of this division happened. So he really so that's why I think he really is applicable to all of us, because he wasn't really a Catholic, he wasn't really a Protestant, he wasn't really Eastern Orthodox. He was all these things. Even though, yes, he settled into Italy, and he had a history with some other monks, but finally ended up establishing Monte Cassino in Italy, which, by the way, is the location of a major World War II battle called Cassino. And there's quite a graveyard there. Benedict's rule. So this is the rule of Benedict, and I'm going to pass it around. You can look at it. This is what he put together for his monastery in Monte Cassino for his monks to follow. And it's about the size of Matthew's Gospel, as you can see there. And I wrote down it's an interpretation of the Gospel for daily living and community. So the idea of the rule was that this was going to be a way to take the Gospel and really live it out in community. It's kind of like wisdom literature. So you're taking the wisdom of monks who've come before you, and he puts them in there. There was another rule, the rule of the master, before this one, and he actually borrowed from that. And made it was longer though. And the cool thing about Benedict was when he adapted the rule of the master and some other sources into his rule, he made it shorter and very adaptable. So it's easily used in all different kind of cultures. So nicely done. And you'll see, I think in that version of it, I think it's italics. I think inside. I think there's italicized writing in there, and that's scripture. This thing is laced with scripture, so there's scripture throughout the rule of Benedict. So it's not just his writing or what he put down. So that's the rule, and all Benedictine monks would follow the rule. Most monastic traditions have a rule. There's an Augustinian rule. Augustine wrote a rule for his monks when he started the Augustinian order, and so this is the rules by which they live. And you know, we all have rules in our life. Married people have a rule book, so to speak. We all live by rules that allow us to live in community with other people, and that's what this is. And it's got a lot of great stuff in it. By the way, it's got some. It was a standard rule during the Middle Ages, from 800 to 1200. This was the monastic rule that was standard for all monasteries in the Western world. Not in the Eastern world, but in the Western world. From 1800 to 1200, copied more than any other piece of literature during that time than the Bible. The Bible was copied more, but this was second. Tell you what, can you find chapter 40? And I think this copy is divided into verses. Verse 6, chapter 40. Because there's some humor in this rule too. So, sorry to put that in the spot, Andy.
That's all right.
And I think there's.
It comes after 30 minutes.
Yeah, it comes after 40. Yeah, but he looked at table contents for sure. But anyway, 40, verse 6.
All right. We read that monks should not drink wine at all. But since the monks of our day cannot be convinced of this, let us at least agree to drink moderately and not to the point of excess.
There you go. That's good.
Wine makes even wise men go astray.
That's right. So I love that, you know. I don't want you to drink wine, but I know you will. So, and there's even in the original writing in Latin, there's even a word that's a measurement, and we don't actually know what that measurement is. So, which probably some of us today appreciate. But anyway, but it's you can see that it's humane. It's got Benedictine monastic tradition. You can see it on their list there. The monastery is, to quote the rule, a school for the Lord's service. I think that's beautiful. And I referenced that to Acts chapter 2 and Acts chapter 4, where Luke tells us that the early church was meeting together and breaking bread every day and listening to the apostles' instruction and all that. That's what this is. It's just a school for the Lord's service. And I love the way Rowan Williams, one of our former archbishops in the Anglican world, said, "A person's attempting to create by grace the likeness of Christ, forming themselves and each other in a shared life." I think that's just beautiful. They're trying to be Christ-like. In fact, if you think about it, what the rule and Benedictine tradition are trying to do, as other traditions, is guide us in our sanctification. Right? Guide us in our becoming holy. Which is really, the purpose of sanctification is to become human again. All of us in this room are less than human. We've fallen from what God intended for us to be when God created us as human beings. And what Jesus wanted us to do when he came and showed us what it means to be a human being, he was showing us what it means for us to complete our sanctification and become glorified as a human being, as God meant for us to be. And so I always think of what the Benedictine tradition is trying to do is help us in our sanctification to become human again, especially living together with other people in the community, which we really need right now. So they're trying to do that. So that's what I put next. It's really about sanctification to become the true human selves God created us to be. And they weren't looking for spiritual gold medalists. It's a misnomer to think of the monastic tradition and the Benedictine order as guys trying to be, like I say, spiritual gold medalists. No. They were just trying to be Christians, faithful Christians. And as one monk said to me, our monastic tradition is extraordinarily ordinary. That's what I put on here. And I don't know, some of you read Cloisterwalk by... Yeah, so Cloisterwalk is a great book that actually put Benedictines in the bestseller list. Kathleen Norris, who was an acquaintance of mine, she was a Presbyterian like I was, and then we became oblates. And she was in Dakota when I was in Dakota. And but she wrote another book called Dakota, which I really love. It's about life in the Dakotas and spirituality of all that. And I asked the monk that I was giving a ride to from one place to another one time, and I said, "Which book do you like the best?" And he said, "Well, I like the Lakota." And I found most male Benedictines like Lakota, and most female Benedictines like Cloisterwalk. And excuse the language, but he said, "Yeah, in Cloisterwalk, she makes our life look so damn boring." Anyway. But it is, if you go to a monastery, it looks boring. But when you get into the rhythm of the life, it becomes extraordinarily ordinary. So that's the way I like to think about it. And so this is accomplished in your notes there through ascesis. That's a Latin word that means discipline or training. And it was a word that was used in the military of boot camp, getting ready for military fighting. So the early monastics took that word, ascesis, or discipline, and said, you're in the boot camp of your Christian discipleship. And so ascesis are disciplines, so spiritual disciplines that we use to become what? Spiritually fit. And that's the best way to put it. The disciplines are so that we will be, we discipline in physical exercise to be physically fit. They were just trying to help us to be spiritually fit by exercising certain disciplines like daily prayer, like moderation in our eating and so forth. In fact, that reminds me that one of the abbots, after Abbot Dennis, got kind of on the monks there at Lookout Abbey because at breakfast they had about 5 different boxes of Okholm cereal. And he said, you guys don't need that variety, so stop it. So anyway, so they brought it down to 1 or 2. Anyway, it was just to be disciplined in our eating, in our praying, in our daily life. They had exercise equipment and everything too, these guys, so that's all the way around. Common objections that people have: monks are not living in the real world. But that's my question. What is the real world? And I wanted to just read a little bit from a great book called Monk Habits for Everyday People. This is actually from a better book, and if I can find where I access this. Yeah. So Richard John Newhouse, you may have read some of his stuff. He's a Roman Catholic, a great Roman Catholic writer and priest. He was a convert from Protestantism. He said this: "We contemplate for a time the meaning of Good Friday." This is in a book that he wrote on Good Friday. "And then return to what is called the real world of work and shopping and commuter trains and homes. As we come out of a movie theater and shake our heads to clear our minds of another world where we live for a time in suspended disbelief, as we reorient ourselves to reality, so we leave our contemplation. We leave the church building, we close the book, where for a time another reality seemed possible, believable, even real. But we tell ourselves the real world is a world elsewhere. It's the world of deadlines to be met, of appointments to be kept, of taxes to be paid, of children. It is a distant country. Father, forgive them, for they have forgotten the way home. They have misplaced the real world. Here at the cross is the real world. Here is the Axis movement." In my book, I use an analogy of a story. One of my students in college said that her father, a pastor, picked her up from a week of Christian camp on Saturday, and she got into the car and said to her dad, "Well, Dad, I guess we're going back to the real world." And he said, "No, you were in the real world for a week." So that's what we need to question. What is really the real world? So, nice cheers. And there's a handout there for you. So that's one my way of answering that about the real world. And then monks just spend all the time praying. Yeah, originally, Benedict in the rule says we gather 8 times a day for prayer. Psalm 119, one verse says, "I praise you 7 times a day," and then another verse says, "I get up in the middle of the night to praise you." So 7 plus 1 is 8. So Benedict said 8 times. Benedictines today, typically in their monasteries, will only do it about 4 times a day, and maybe include Mass in addition to that. So they've reduced the number of prayer times together, communal prayer times. If you were to go to a Cistercian monastery, which comes out of the Benedictine tradition, like the monks like Thomas Merton's monastic tradition, they still do 8 times a day. So they'll get up like at 4:30 in the morning for the night prayers. Do that. So yeah. But look, I put down, yeah, they pray, but they've been missionaries and activists. One of the things I love about the Benedictines is that they debate with their contemplatives, because they're also activists. And as proof of that, I didn't have a quarterly copy of what I get every quarter from the BCRI. That's the Benedictine Coalition for Responsible Investment. But I did have what they sent me last time, and the mail. And this is a group of Benedictine sisters who buy stock in all kinds of companies so they can go to the stock meetings and vote on policies that corporations have. And then they get a report every quarter of where they went, what they proposed, and whether they're successful or not. Because, as Benedictines, they're always worried about the world. They're for the world, just like we are as C4SO people for the sake of others. And so I love that as one of the examples. And the monks here, they settled in Dakota to minister to the Lakota tribe, the indigenous peoples in North Dakota. And they established a school along with church and so forth. And then when it became fully established, they turned it over to them and let them run it. And so that was, in fact, one of the monks here, Father Stan, even had a museum in the monastery of Lakota and other indigenous people's artifacts. So it's kind of cool. So I don't buy the idea that just because they're involved in so much prayer during the day that they're irrelevant. I think they're incredibly relevant. But also just because of the way they show us how to live together as Christians, how to settle disputes and so forth. I think it's beautiful. Benedictine vows. They have the evangelical vows. Those are evangelical means. These are the vows that every person who buys into the gospel should follow. Chastity, which for them means celibacy, but for anybody else, it's simply being responsible in your sexual life. So chastity is huge, of course. And then poverty. Now, if you were a Jesuit, you would be giving up all of your stuff, right? What Benedictines do is share things, and so poverty for them is communal ownership. So if you were going to be entering into one of the abbeys as a novice, you would, well, once you took final vows, you would contribute all of your possessions. Either you would give them away, or you would contribute some or all of them to the monastery, and they would be communal possessions. So same with cars. I mean, they have cars in the monastery, but they're owned by the community. So poverty is thought of in that way. And obedience. Obedience is mutual obedience. So it's not hard-nosed, and like I told you, with the abbot telling Brother Rene, you have to play the organ, he listened to his concerns and would have backed off if he thought it was appropriate, but ultimately the abbot is the one you obey. And I want to relate that to something else coming up here. Benedictines add two more vows, and these are, so the evangelical vows are traditional with all monastic groups. So all monastic groups that come out of the Middle Ages, like the Jesuits, for instance, would follow chastity, poverty, and obedience. It's just that sometimes they define things like poverty differently. Benedictines add two more, stability and conversatio morum. So stability means when you make a vow to this monastery, your final vows, and their monasteries have different time periods for that. It might be anywhere from 3 to 7 years till you make a final vow. You are making it like a marriage commitment. You will stay with this group for the rest of your life. Now, one of the monks here was doing farming in the community. For a while there, they raised their own beef and stuff like that. And he went into town, little town, and picked up the mail every day. And he met a woman in the little town, fell in love with her. And with the monk's blessing, he left the monastic tradition and became a married person. And that happens once in a while. But it's usually done with grace, and it's not expected. So stability, and I always say this, stability means you stay in the same place to become the kind of person that God wants you to be. In other words, it's stability that allows you to progress. There are people who jump around from church to church to church to church, and they never are known by the community. So they can always keep the mask up. But if you're with the same community for 50 years, they know who you are. There's no fooling them. And so you're going to be worked on. And so stability is in order to make progress. And then conversatio morum, the conversion of morals, if you will, means that on a daily basis, they're turned. I mean, I grew up Baptist like some of you all, or I also was Pentecostal before that. We thought of conversion as make a decision for Jesus one day and you're done, right? No. For the monks, it's a daily conversion. And the idea is, that the word means to turn. I keep turning back to God every day. Why? Because I keep turning away. And so for them, conversion isn't a one-time experience. It's conversatio, continually conversion, which is beautiful. And then some more Benedictine values. Listening in a world of noise. So I took these 6 students. This course was a 3-week course. And we were spending 10 days in the monastery. So we spent a few days on campus, and I was giving them background to the medieval period and all of that. And then we went to 10 days, and then we came back for a few more days to talk a little bit more about the monastic tradition. And I said to them, my first question when they came back was, what was your first impression when you got back to campus? And the first thing that one of them said was, I didn't realize how noisy the dorm was. They had been in relative silence in the monastery. I mean, we had a good time. We even watched some movies with the monks, right? Like Name of the Rose and stuff like that. That was fun. And one of the kids brought a guitar, and we played music for them, Christian music, and they joined us. And it's not that there's not noise, but it's relative silence. it's a way of listening. One of the analogies I use in this book is a story I heard one time of a botanist who was in New York City visiting with a friend, and he stopped and he said, "Did you hear that cricket?" And the person said, "What cricket?" And he had been trained to hear that, but he said most people were trained to hear like a quarter dropping on the sidewalk or something like that. We're trained to hear what we want to hear, and so the first words in the Rule of Benedict is listen. Max, first words in chapter 1.
Sorry, I was reading the preface.
That's okay, as well you should.
The prologue or the,
Yeah, there's a lot.
or chapter 1?
Yeah.
First words?
First sentence.
There are clearly 4 kinds of monks.
Oh, no, wait, is that it? So, there should be,
That's chapter 1.
yeah, but no, the prologue. I'm sorry, the prologue.
That's the prologue.
Are you reading the prologue? No, he's reading the preface, right? You reading the prologue?
There's a prologue.
That's what you should read.
Okay.
Yeah. That's the beginning of it. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Listen carefully, my son, to the master's instructions and attend to them with the ear of your heart.
Yeah, that's the first word in the Rule of Benedict. Listen. Listen to this tradition that we have been handing down. And I think for all of us, that's important for us to do, especially in these days, right? Even in that other world, besides the real world, listening to others and listening. And the word listen in Latin has a root that is similar to obedience. And so there again, listening and obedience. Am I listening to what God wants me to do? And if I'm listening, then I will obey. And so listening becomes a very important value of Benedictines. And then poverty, as I've already mentioned this, communal ownership, and stewardship. They try to be good stewards with everything that they have. And I think that's led more by the Benedictine women for some reason. I don't know why. The same ones that are involved in the investments. But, we can all be good stewards too with what we have. And that's why I was kind of tipped off all these bottled waters that are plastic. But anyway, that's another story. Anyway, balance. One of the Benedictine models is work, study, pray. Work, study, pray. That's one of the Benedictine models. And that's what they wanted to do, is have balance in your life. So, for instance, I've gone to, in fact, we're going to go again next week to Val Guillermo for an oblate retreat. And some of you have been there, to St. Andrew's Abbey. And what's cool is I've gone there for a private retreat for maybe a week, but I'm also doing writing. And so in my room I'm writing. And then you hear the bell ring. And the bell means it's time for one of the daily prayers, daily offices. The idea is, in the Benedictine tradition, you put down immediately what you're doing, and you go. And that's the balance, because life isn't just about work, it's also about prayer. But it's not just about prayer, it's also about work. And then study, of course, and by study, most of the monks in most monasteries, at dinner time especially, monks are, some monasteries, they will eat in silence while they're read to. And it might be a fiction book, it might be like a Kathleen Norris book, Cloister Walk, and they're read to for a while. Until the abbot goes, that would stop, okay. And then they read a little bit from the rule and move on. And I thought it was so cool. By the way, that combines with listening in this sense. One of my first times at Blue Cloud Abbey, sitting at the table at dinner, and it's supposed to be silent, not talk. And it was amazing to me that the monks were so aware of what was going on right around them at the table that they would anticipate what you needed. So I needed salt. And so the salt shaker showed up right there. So, but there's a sense in which, again, that silence and the listening, but it goes along with the balance in life, work, study, and prayer. So again, most Benedictine monasteries today will have 4 times a prayer a day. Get up in the morning and have morning prayer, lots. Then the second thing they would do is at St. Andrew's they'll have Mass, which is at noon. And then they'll have prayer just before dinner, and that's Vespers. And then they'll have compline. The word means completion. and they have the great silence. And the great silence is after you walk out of the confine. No more talking until lauds the next morning, when the first words are, "Open my lips, O Lord, and my mouth shall declare your praise." Psalm 51. And then hospitality. This is in the rule. Let everyone that comes be received as Christ. And that gives me goosebumps, because what if we did that as Holy Trinity Church? We treated every visitor who comes as a visitation of Christ. And that's what Abbot Dennis did when he said in Mass that day, after we'd been there 7 days. These students, we thank God for these students visiting us, because they're here to question whether we keep the vows that we profess. In other words, they were considering our visitation as a visitation of Christ for them. We're not Christ, but we're received as Christ. And that's a huge value in the world of Benedictine tradition, to welcome each guest as Christ. So I just want, actually that's going to, just a preview of a coming attraction, that's going to feed into the sermon today anyway. So what if we receive each visitor as a visitation of Christ, no matter who that was? Yes. Go ahead.
Later.
There's time now, so yeah.
Okay, so in one of her books, Kathleen Norris,
Kathy Norris.
she says that when you go to a Benedictine monastery and they open the gate, no matter what time of the day or night, they say, "Thank God you've come." That's the way.
Yeah.
And I have that on my front door when we do quiet morning. There's a little chalkboard there that says, "Thank God you've come."
I love that. Thank you for reminding me of this. That's so good, yeah. And it is true, when you go, any of you can go to a Benedictine monastery, and especially at St. Andrews, you'll be treated with open arms. I'm mentioning too, in the bottom here, there's another Benedictine monastery in Oceanside, Prince of Peace. It's beautiful too, and it's great for, you can rent a room, and the rental of the room includes your 3 meals and so forth, and if you want to meet with a monk, you can. It's just that at Prince of Peace, they're screwed on a little tighter in the Roman Catholic tradition, so you don't get to be with the monks quite as much as you are at St. Andrews in Galliano, where you're actually eating in the same refectory with the monks, even though at a different table. But at Prince of Peace, there's a guest refectory, and one of the monks will join you there, which is great. But it's unlike Blue Cloud and St. Andrews, where I got to eat with the monks all the time. Prince of Peace is a little bit different. But each monastery in the Benedictine tradition is like Baptist churches. They're all a little different. So anyway, so thanks for sharing that. That's beautiful. And then finally, for the sake of the world, to be an alternative culture. The monastic tradition isn't there for itself. It's there, especially in the Benedictine tradition. And even, like I was saying, the Jesuit tradition, amazing, because they've been educators and done incredible work for us as educators. But the Benedictine tradition, definitely for the sake of the world, has an alternative community. And I want to say that, not a countercultural community. Think about that phrase, counterculture. If you're countercultural, you're allowing the prevailing culture to set the agenda that you're countering. I mean, can I just say this? Right now, given the events of the past few days, we've been tempted to be just countercultural, no matter where you're coming from. I mean, hearing all the noise. What if we just took our cues from Jesus, and we were simply an alternative culture? We're not countering anything. We're just being faithful to Jesus as a culture that is an alternative to anything else. Anything else. And I think that's what the Benedictines are trying to do. To live out the gospel in daily communal life, to show the world there's another way to live in this community. And they're not insisting everybody become monks to do that, but they are saying that there's a lot in our tradition that will help people to be that way. So for the sake of the world, if you I'm not advertising the book, but the last chapter in here, if you get it or if you read it, is a paper that I read to a community called the American. Bennett, my public director, Bennett, they had an annual conference for oblate directors. They would gather together. And one year, they decided to invite, each oblate director could invite 2 oblates from his or her monastery to come. And he invited me to come. And not only invited me to come, but he invited me to do one of the plenary papers there. And that's the last chapter in here. I was trying to remind my Benedictine brothers and sisters, you're here at the stage of the world. And so I try to unpack that, what that means. And I think that was so generous of them to invite us to their conference that they had every year. So, suggestions for going deeper if you want to. Well, develop daily habits, such as beginning the day with open-mindedness. Actually, and I don't know if it's in our active prayer book, but it's in the Episcopal prayer book. There's a daily office for the morning that opens with that. And it goes further. Open my lips, O Lord, and my mouth shall declare your praise. Create in me a clean heart, O God. Renew a right spirit within me. Cast me not away from your presence. Take not your Holy Spirit from me. Give me the joy of your salvation again. Glory be to the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. It's right from Psalm 51. And that's the way they start the day. Open my lips, O Lord. Isn't that a beautiful way to start the day? Open my lips, O Lord. And so I do that when I wake up every morning. Those are my first thoughts. Open my lips, O Lord, and my mouth shall declare your praise. And then the Psalter. The Psalter is the daily habit that goes without compromise. Every daily office, whether it's 8 times a day or 4 times a day, always includes psalms. And so I've learned that habit myself. Every day has to start with the Psalter. And they had the Psalter. Benedict had the Psalter written out such that they would go 8 times a day. They would go through the entire Psalter every week, all 150 Psalms. Now, if you just do it 4 times a day, they try to get through in a month, the entire Psalter. But that's amazing, and that gets into you. The Psalms get into you. So those are 2 habits that you could do, and there are others. Go on a personal retreat in a monastery. I mentioned these 2 places already. You can just, they have websites, and you can make reservations to do a private retreat. And then, I don't know about Prince of Peace, but St. Andrew's has not just private retreats, but you can sign up for, like, about every week, they've got some retreat for 2 or 3 days with a speaker of some sort leading you on a topic. And the topics range all the way across subject matters. So that's another thing you can do and go like that. So, and while you're there, you're welcome to join the monks in the daily office. So at Guillermo, you just sit in the back. They have a little teeny church, and you sit in the back. The monks are up front, and you can join in chanting the psalms with them. You kind of do it, quietly, but you're vocally doing the psalms because they'll give you a sheet to work with. Prince of Peace, same thing. So you're sitting where the congregation sits and participating. So, which is kind of cool. Because you get up in the morning, and the first thing you're doing is you're having daily prayer with the monks. Yeah. And then another thing here, become an oblate. There are, let's see, this is old statistic. This is an old statistic. But, let's see if I can find here. I don't know if I'm going to find it really quick. There are thousands of Benedictine oblates. These are non-monastic people who want to associate with a monastery, and you do take a vow of sorts. They have a little ceremony, and you take a vow of sorts to be guided by the rule of Benedict in your daily life, that kind of thing. And you can see some of the oblates. Dorothy Day, you know her, she's an incredible Roman Catholic activist. Alec Guinness, Walter Percy, one of my favorite authors, Eugene McCarthy, Rose Kennedy. Some of those names are from the past, but those are Benedictine oblates. What's that? Yeah, I know. I don't know if there are any new ones that are celebs. I don't know. So we'll find out. But I just thought, that's pretty amazing. So, and then read some good books on the application of Benedictine spirituality in everyday life. So I list some faves in the back of my book, but a couple that need mentioning are Joan Chittister, Benedictine sister, fantastic writer. Wisdom Wisdom Distilled from the Daily is, I think, one of the best books ever. And no matter if you want to get into Benedictine tradition or you don't, you will learn so much from her, and she writes so well. She writes so beautifully. And she's one of those Benedictine sisters who's kind of edgy. You know? I mean, some of them are saying, hey, it's the Roman Catholic Church. We've got to recognize us women, too. We've been really significant in this history. So they're kind of edgy in that respect. But this is a wonderful book. Anglican Catholic Norse's Cloister Walk, but I also think the Code is a wonderful book, too. She's written some other books as well. Interesting person, like I say, Presbyterian, became a Roman Catholic Benedictine. She's still a Presbyterian as far as I know, but she's adopted a lot of Roman Catholic practices. And she was married to a guy who had some addiction problems. He was a poet, and he died. And so one of her books was just reflecting on all of that and how that took place and how she dealt with it. So. Brian Taylor, Spirituality for Everyday Living. Really small book, but a great book if you guys want to get into a small group and talk about Benedictine spirituality. Each chapter is maybe 3 or 4 pages, and then it has a couple of discussion questions. And so he introduces you very quickly to some Benedictine values and such. But it's a great book for discussion. And then Bennett Tibetan, that was my oblate director at Blue Cloud Abbey, and The View from a Monastery. And if I had more time, I would have brought that book and read you one of the stories. Because he's got some humorous stories that actually took place at Blue Cloud Abbey. And he's just trying to show you that there's some serious parts of it and some humorous parts. And he's just showing you that these monks were really they're just real people that, have a daily life together. And it's just, it's a wonderful book. So if you want a book that just gives you a really human view of this monastic tradition. And then David Robinson is a retired Presbyterian pastor in Cannon Beach, Oregon. Trevek and I have actually had gone to his church and then had lunch with him afterwards. And he's had several books out, but if you want to do this for the family, this is a great book, The Family Cloister, Benedictine Wisdom for the Home. So he actually wrote a book that gives guidance for instilling some of these Benedictine values and virtues in the home life. And it's kind of some of it step-by-step type stuff, getting together as a family. So, and he's written some other stuff recently that's good and helpful. So, and then anything by Michael Casey. Michael Casey is a Cistercian monk, and again, they're coming out of the Benedictine tradition. Thomas Merton type people. But Casey, this book that I mentioned here, A Guide to Living in the Truth, that's a book on humility. Because he defines humility as knowing the truth about yourself. In other words, humility doesn't mean beating yourself up or saying, I'm just so humble. It means knowing your strengths, your weaknesses, being honest about yourself. And so he applies the Benedictine traditions to investigating this virtue of humility in that book. But he's written some other books too, and I just love his stuff. In our Oblate group in Orange County, that meets maybe every 2 months or so, is going through that book chapter by chapter. We used to meet monthly with Father Luke Deisinger, who is a Benedictine monk at St. Andrews. He grew up Presbyterian at St. Andrews Presbyterian Church in Newport Beach. Now he's a monk at St. Andrews Abbey in Del Amo. And he's an MD and a PhD, and he taught himself to play the harp. So he let us invent, when we get together, he would give us a little talk. They call it a conference, and he would play the harp and lead us in vespers. So, I don't know. The DNA has to be pulled around a little bit better, but I don't know. Anyway, so. And then my book, I wrote my book as a way of helping Protestants especially to appreciate the Benedictine tradition. And I know a few of you have read it. And it's, it was my way of taking what's been given to me and sharing it with others. That's simply what it is. So, yeah. We got a little more time if you have questions or we'll